Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome back to ORF's Raisina Fireside Chats. My name is Astha Kapoor. I'm the co-founder of Aapti Institute. We're a tech and society research firm based out of Bangalore, and I'm pleased to be joined by with Sharma, co-founder iSPIRT, and Henri Verdier, Digital Affairs Ambassador, Government of France, as well as the former CIO. Today we will be talking about the idea of digital commons, and it comes at an interesting day because Jack Dorsey has just tweeted out saying that he would have liked Twitter to be a public protocol or platform, and we in India are increasingly seeing the proliferation of these public platforms. And what's interesting is that it comes as a response to bad actors, both in the form of states, private companies, as well as individuals. And the idea of digital commons is a way to negotiate with that. So I'll start with my first question for Henri. Henri, who are these bad actors, and how do they interface with the idea of digital commons?
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here with you and to share the stage with my friend Sharad. First I want to recall that this story, the internet story, is a story of commons. Actually, TCP/IP itself, internet itself, the web, Linux, MySQL, Apache, Bluetooth, ADSL are open standards. And it was like an utopian vision. People wanted to empower the people, to foster innovation, to access to knowledge, to education, to share vision and solidarity. And let's remember that it did work. We create a great stream of innovation and a lot of social and economic progresses. And yes, now, today, we have to face some threats on this, and something that is less well balanced. And we could consider that every thread on this revolution are a thread on the common aspects, on the public core of internet, on the open standards. So to make it briefly, we have some weaponization of this revolution with criminal actors and sometimes from states actors, but they don't respect anything, not the public core of internet, not the very simple rules of fairness and ethics. We have some concern with bad balance. So we have two big monopolies, and they try to control the system and sometimes to impose their rules or their standards. We have some negative externalities of some actors, like social network. Of course, we will have to face the fact that they spread dissensus, polarization, sometimes hate or fake news. And if we do observe carefully, it's probably because they don't respect the initial promise of internet. They are centralized, non-neutral, non-open, non-free. And that's why we have concerns to fix this. And sometimes we have another threat, which are the bad answers from government themselves. Because government, because they fear this, they try to control internet, they contest the multi-stakeholder model, the multilateral model, and they can make huge mistakes. But on some point of view, everything here comes from or a disrespect or a bad understanding of the initial principle of this revolution.
No, that's super interesting because we've also been thinking about what are the different ways of governing the commons, and in the context of India, we are seeing that there's infrastructure that is being built, digital infrastructure that's being built, which is public in nature, and would love to hear from you, Sharad, as to why that's peculiar and where do we go from there.
First of all, I think we are tied by the same philosophy that is at work. Building on what Henri said, I think there's a very practical reason to do it here in India, because at some level this becomes a competition between a single party monopoly system versus a multi-party system that's anchored on a common kind of a protocol, a kind of a common digital commons, a public good. And what is happening here in India is that when you contrast these two approaches, you see that the second one outperforms the first when it comes to inclusion. It comes to taking things like the payment system, right, to the masses, right? So why? Because if you have a digital common, then many people can innovate on top of that. It is a basis for innovation, without capturing all the value of that innovation in one company. So it unleashes innovation, and that innovation then benefits a larger number of people. So I think the reason why we are doing this is that both sides want to preserve their digital sovereignty, but I think also in India, this is the best method, very practical reason for getting the penetration for digital systems that we need for India to thrive and prosper, in a multiple range of areas, whether it's payments or it's data or it's lending or it's education, it's health. In all of these cases, we need to create the digital commons so that private innovation can thrive on top of it. Now, keep in mind, India is a very diverse country, right? So we don't have one solution, one size that will fit all. So having this common infrastructure, which is in the public domain, allows people to adapt it to various parts of India and various segments of India.
No, of course, and we've all benefited from that infrastructure. You mentioned payments. UPI is a success story, and we've all seen how it's trickled down, like you said, to the last mile, and has brought payments to be very inclusive, whether you're a small business or, a hawker on the street in Bangalore, where we're from. You see those QR codes at every small stop. Yeah.
We don't appreciate that all payment systems so far, Visa, MasterCard, Alipay, WeChat Pay, Venmo, these are the prominent payment systems that they're all single party systems.
Right.
The only multi-party payment system, which is inclusive, which anybody can join tomorrow, is actually UPI, because it's putting the protocol in the middle rather than anything else in the middle. Now, ironically, that's also become the fastest growing payment system. It's the most successful. So I think this is really India's contribution. I think it is right from a philosophy perspective. It is also right from a practical perspective.
No, absolutely. So when we talk about digital public infrastructure, and India is, like I said, is a peculiar case. How do we think about building this in other parts of the world where, like I said, in India, there were a group of people that came together and built what is public infrastructure. So as the government of France, what is the role that you think the state can play? Because you said the state can also be a bad actor. So how do we think about both innovation as well as accountability when it comes to DPIs in other parts of the world, like the EU?
Yes. First, I want to say that we governments, some governments like France, we started like you, but here I have to confess that how impressed I am with the Indian story as a former CEO myself, because here the precision of the initial architecture, the quality of the deployment, the group of people involved and sharing knowledge and is very, very impressive, something unique in the world. And I can witness it as a professional. Then I think that we can share that probably that's a good vision of the role of a government. We don't have to innovate on behalf of the society. We have to make things possible. We have to make innovation possible. Some people speak about government as a platform. That's another way to describe it. We have to make things possible, to empower the people, to create, to unleash value, as you said. And here, Europe, for example, understands this and try to. And actually, in the history of France, for example, we did this a century ago, but with water, with rail, with roads. Now we just have to understand that it's the same for digital revolution. And maybe a last idea is that, so this initial vision of internet as a common goods was a bit libertarian. And the interesting thing is that probably we need the government to involve themselves to save the initial vision, but not to build the infrastructure on behalf of everyone, just to make it possible again, to be part of the conversation, to promote, to help, maybe to finance sometimes, but not to run everything.
Yeah.
We have to, to free innovation, to empower creators.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, the idea of empowerment is so critical to the idea of digital public infrastructure. And we've been seeing that, like I said, with payments. There's also the idea of data empowerment that we're increasingly thinking about, which gives individuals and communities a sense of control over their data and how it's being extracted, used, processed, etc. And I would love to understand whether that's an idea you think, Sharad, will have more resonance with other parts of the world, because from what I understand, a lot of countries do have ID systems. Payments, again, is something that will require a whole ecosystem to line up. But data is something that we're all still grappling with many regulations from the EU, as we're seeing an alphabet soup come out, but also, you know, in other parts of the world. So I would love to understand, like, where this conversation of data empowerment goes.
So the web as we know it today was originally conceived in Europe, right? And at that time, the conception was that it would be paid either by subscription or by micropayments. And then, as many people call it, the original sin happened. And the original sin is that it became an advertising supported model. And now a handful of companies have basically taken charge of personal data of billions of people, you know, to be able to run that model, right? So we have a problem here. So I think, you know, one of the benefits that we have here in India is that we were kind of coming in late into the game, so we had an opportunity to see what was happening. And we were able to take 2-3 simple ideas and bring them to life, right? So one is that between consent for collection and consent for sharing is far more important than consent for collection. So that is a break that we had from the American model particularly. Second is that if you got to enforce good behavior of the participants, then a techno-legal approach is needed. You know, simply a regulatory approach will not suffice. You need technology to work. It's like, you know, pottery. You need both hands to shape something useful. And so you needed a techno-legal approach that would be much more effective as we go forward. And the third is that, you know, the key portions of this have to be in the commons, right? And so when you combine these three ideas, then you get a new way of thinking about data where you can resolve the old paradox. The old paradox has been that you can either get a lot of innovation but no privacy, which I would say is the US model, or with GDPR, I think we got a lot of privacy, but at the cost of innovation, right? And here, I think we are able to bring both together in this whole DAPA system that we have, which is Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture. So, and now in India, it's thriving. I think, you know, on the financial data side, we're growing at about 20% week on week, right? And of course, this will come down over time. On the health side, as you must have heard from the meetings that you had, our personal health record system is also growing very rapidly. So at least in 2 sectors, we are able to see that it is working. And if it continues to grow the way it is growing, we can apply it to all other sectors, you know, as is expected to happen if the parliament passes the law that is in front of it. So I think in data, we have an opportunity for India and Europe to come together. Because I would say this is originally a European idea that has been brought to life recently in India. And I have a feeling that this is time for partnership. And if we can partner, you know, we can reshape how data, digital data is thought of in the world today.
So on this, please.
If I can add something, because I was in charge of the open data policy for France, and then I did create the job, the function, the role of chief data officer for the government. So first, let's observe that data create value only if someone uses the data. So the more data circulated, the more people use the data, the more you create value. But the issue is where?
And for whom?
And for who? If you do create value in 2 companies, you don't create such value, and sometimes you delete value in other businesses. So the issue with free flow of data is where and how do we are we sure that it will remain common and it won't be re-enclosed, appropriate, captured by someone. And here, and I take the point that India proved us, probably you need a public open infrastructure. Public to be sure that no one, because it's very easy to re-enclose the data just with a technical standards, just because you have the last data and you can improve the file, just because you encrypt something. So we need to be sure that data circulate within public infrastructures. And of course, we need an open infrastructure to be sure that everyone can check, can observe, to be sure that the government is not trying to use the data to control the society. And so, yes, this idea is also probably the only way to unleash the value and to have control of this future.
And it's interesting because it puts both empowerment and protection together and enables both of those ideas, which are often seen, as you said, at loggerheads with each other. But you also mentioned, Sharad, this partnership, and I would love to understand from you, Henri, what is the face of this, or what happens with this EU-India partnership on ideas of public digital infrastructure or digital commons? What does that look like, and what is, where do we see this collaboration going?
So with such a philosophical alignment, we could imagine a lot of things. But let's start with maybe one of the most simple. So you did build a unique, brilliant infrastructure for a continent. In Europe, it's a bit more complex because we had a legacy, because we are building this within a negotiation between 27 countries. But actually, we share the same principles. And we have interoperability of electronic ID, we have system for the flow of data, we have a GDPR. So it's maybe more complex, less simple, but it goes in the same direction. So probably the first thing, and which is not so difficult, is to build interoperability. Let's imagine a simple world where every European company recognize an Indian ID, and where every Indian company recognize a European ID. If we do this, we build a market of 2 billion people and probably the de facto standards, because this is the main standard and the more efficient. So from my perspective, let's start with interoperability, and then probably the next generation of our system will learn from each other and we'll exchange ideas and we'll progress together. But interoperability is not so difficult.
Yeah. And Sharad, I mean, on this collaboration, what role do you think that we can play, and how do we bring some of our, the values are aligned, but some of the innovations together?
Look, the concept of republic comes from France,
Right.
right? And it's now widespread.
Right.
It's the power of idea
Absolutely.
that travels, right? The Indian lived experience is the same. I mean, we've given, many religions to the rest of the world, but purely not on the back of pushing them, but they've been pulled forward. There's a power of idea that travels. So I think our central belief that we are solving a real problem in a way, founded on principles that we share, I think is a very powerful construct, and something good will come out of it, because we are living in a world where there are problems. You started the conversation by talking about the bad actors. We are facing that problem day in and day out. And I would say the problem is serious enough that you could even make an argument that the democracy is threatened by some of these issues that are coming up. So it's a question, is an existential threat? And so we have to solve it. So I think, there is a commonality of purpose, there's a commonality of principles, and out of this will emerge a commonality of approach.
Right.
We don't know exactly what it will be, but I'm very confident that when we look back 10 years from now, we'll be surprised by how much progress we've made on that.
If I may, because yes, we started speaking about bad actors, and sometimes we have to face bad actors. But main issues are more a lack of regulation than bad actors. The social network, we have to face some severe consequences of the business model of social network. But they don't fraud, they respect the law. We did allow them to make personal advertising, etc. So we need regulation. And as said Sharad, if we make a top-down regulation, a legal framework, you weaken innovation. But if you make regulations through capacities and capacitation, through empowerment, because you share some resources that are well designed, you regulate and you promote innovation. So that's the vision, actually.
No, absolutely. But thank you for this wonderful conversation. It's really heartening to know that, A, there's an alternative to certain kinds of governance systems that we've seen in the digital world, whether it's, one kind or the other, and that there's an active contemplation of a third way, which is embedded in the idea of commons, which is embedded in the idea of empowerment, but also protection, a way in which we can take both regulation as well as an ability to foster innovation together and move in a way that individuals, communities, small businesses are all empowered through this exercise. And very excited to look back on this conversation 10 years from now and see what EU and India get up to together on this idea of digital commons. So thank you so much. yes,
I
of
totally
course.
share your brilliant
No.
conclusion, but if I may, this
Yes.
is not the third way, this is the first way.
This is the first way. I will be correct. So a new first way
Coming
of
back to the basics.
yes,
I
back
think
to the
this is-
basic,
yeah,
the first
yeah.
principles, and starting with the individual and the community, and how we sort of reclaim the internet and the way of doing things digitally. So thank you both for this fantastic conversation, and thank you, Raisina.